These scary deep woods horror stories may be unsettling, and few people who venture there regularly come up with at least one scary experience that creeped them out. So, take a journey with me as we go through the woods to bring out some scary stories that will blow your mind. Story 1. The Backyard Monster. I'm Vanessa, and I was raised in a small Wisconsin town in the middle of nowhere. My dad always talked about this weird animal in the backyard when I was growing up, but he never told me what it was until middle school. Before I delve into the spine-chilling tale, let me provide some background information about my family. At 15, my dad's life was turned upside down. Due to the careless conduct of an alcoholic driver, he lost his right leg and was now wheelchair-bound. He continued supporting our family despite this great adversity by working a full-time job on the third shift. Our duplex, a comfortable house tucked into a hill, was shared with my parents' extended relatives, who lived on the top half, attached to a garage and a patio overlooking an undergrowth of woods. Even though I am 22 years old, I was just a child when the events occurred, and my father and aunt told me most of the story of that night. As a high school football coach, my uncle would regularly take my aunt to games so she could become familiar with the surroundings. After the game, she would leave her car parked at our house and be picked up by my uncle. But this evening, my uncle dropped her off to pick up her car after dinner. My dad and I were at home, so it was a calm and serene environment. When my uncle's car pulled out of the driveway, my aunt settled in and put her purse down. Her gaze was abruptly attracted to the POW door, where she was met with a terrifying sight. Outside, a massive figure loomed. Its outline is framed by the shadows cast by the surrounding forest. When my aunt saw how strikingly the monster looked to a werewolf or dogman from folklore, her heart began to race. She couldn't look away from the thing's stare through the glass, frozen in fear. A shiver went down her spine as the creature approached her car with purposeful strides as if it knew she was there. Shockingly, my aunt was so terrified that she put her head on the steering wheel and prayed for the nightmare to end. She waited for her fate for minutes that seemed to go on forever. When she finally plucked up the courage to look up, she saw the thing running back into the woods' shadows. She started the engine with quivering hands and dashed off, her heart pounding from her desperation to get to safety. She chased my uncle, who was already quite a way ahead of her in those days before the arrival of cell phones. Fear took hold of her as she hurried to tell her story, almost resulting in an accident. She eventually caught up with my uncle in a desperate hurry, who stopped to speak with her. Her description of the horrific experience that had occurred at my family's house came out in a torrent of hysteria. My uncle calmed her shivering self and convinced her to drive the rest of the way home, despite her desperate cries. My aunt got to our house and immediately told my dad about the horrific experience. My dad reacted quickly, going outdoors to explore the woods, his senses sharpened by adrenaline-fueled fear, but even after a thorough search, he could not locate the monster that had scared my aunt. Even though I still find my aunt's story implausible, I am inescapably uneasy whenever I look at those dark woods. It seems like invisible eyes are watching our house, just waiting to break through the dark corners. One day, when I realized something or someone was observing me from the deep woods while attempting to reconnect with nature, I couldn't help but ponder what it could be. My body felt cold and uneasy as my heart continued to race over what I had seen from the woods, and my aunt's terrifying story raced through my thoughts. I started running as fast as I could, afraid that what my aunt had seen might come back to haunt me. I decided to start running, and sure enough, a massive creature covered in hair appeared and began to pursue me. I was too scared to run on weak legs. All I could think about was my beautiful family, whom I had left behind at home. The beast was determined to pursue me and was almost upon me. That night it approached me as though I was its only chance of survival. I wondered whether this was how my life was going to end, so I ran as fast as my legs would carry me. Unfortunately, I ran into a stone and ended up on the ground while trying to flee from this scary beast that was so close to me. I felt like I might die. I prayed for a miracle and continued to cry. I closed my eyes and prayed as hard as I knew how to. The beast's claws were about to split me, but then, out of nowhere, there was a gunshot. When I opened my eyes, the beast was on the ground. I I felt my body and realized that I was still alive. It was a miracle. Never again would I venture into the deep woods by myself. Story 2. The Terrifying Mission. You would be 100% correct if you are among those who believe that the government is continuously covering things up and keeping a great deal of secrets from you. They employ a lot of people, including me, to fix their errors. I'm not really sure why they picked me. I don't think I have anything unique to offer, but maybe that's precisely why. I'm easily disposable because I'm not going to develop the next weapons of mass destruction or cure cancer, and I was already a loner. One day, after I had wrapped up my shift at a fast food restaurant, they approached me. My life was so boring that I was ready for any kind of change, so I'm not sure I really had a choice. The men who knocked on my door didn't even tell me what I would be doing, but that I would not turn back if I wanted to help my nation. Even if my life has become somewhat peculiar, I still don't regret it. It would be a hard year for me the next year. I underwent rigorous mental and physical training. Things that I had assumed only existed in movies were revealed to me. If I hadn't passed the training, I don't know what would have happened to me, but I doubt they would have just let me return to my regular life. Throughout the entire year, and until my graduation, they never once mentioned what I was training for. After receiving the go-ahead from higher-ups, I was eventually shown what I would be doing in a small room filled with black suits. Seeking for failed experiments and other odds that the government had failed to contain would be my new job. Certain occupations would be quite easy, while others would not be the same. Others are nearly unachievable. The target can usually be returned alive or dead for further experimentation, but it is obviously preferable to return the victim alive for most missions. My first task was simple, with the code name, the Juice Man. Like other failed experiments, the Juice Man was once a human. Though he still looks like your average juice truck driver, underneath he's really a robot who is solely thinking about how to accomplish his job. So, one would ask, what makes the Juice Man so unique? I constantly come up with my own theories, even though I never find out why I hunt the things that I do. The truly unique aspect is the juice vendor's vehicle. Anyone within earshot is drawn to the truck by the music emanating from the horns, which virtually acts as a human magnet. You purchase juice once you get up close to the truck. I've heard that the juice tastes excellent, but since having a taste of it sends a person into a fugue state, you'll never know for sure. After drinking the juice, your day will proceed as usual for 12 hours, but you won't remember anything the next day. I'm sure you can understand why this would be a useful tool for the government. Regretfully, the Juice Man was rather underestimated by the scientist in charge of his tests. 12 hours later, they had woken up and were wondering where their test subject had disappeared to. This easy assignment was probably handed to me as some sort of test. After receiving a set of upgraded noise-canceling earphones, I was directed to the last known position of the Juice Man. Finding him wasn't difficult. All I had to do was follow the large group of cars waiting in line to receive their delicious gift. I let him help everyone in the neighborhood. If no one knew, it would be much easier for me to take him. I got in line after everyone else had finished their juice. He tried to serve me, but I reached inside the vehicle and gave him a tranquilizer shot instead. Even though all he is right now is a shell of a man, he nonetheless needs regular medicine. I fastened his truck to my car and tied him up. After leaving him at the closest government building, I waited for my next victim. As I mentioned, this would be one of the simpler projects, and the Digger would be the code name for my next target. This was much more a difficult assignment. In contrast to the Juice Man, the Digger was still largely human. He hadn't turned into a mindless zombie or lost his emotions, and maybe that was the issue. Extensive testing has allowed the Digger to produce a powerful, focused earthquake. He had collapsed the entire facility where he was being held. The Digger's primary concern was the harm he could do to others nearby. Many lives could be lost if he used his gift in a densely populated region. This was among the rare instances in which I was counseled against bringing the target back to life. I feel like this project was a test once more, but it was different. The government wanted to know if I would kill for them without hesitation, and if I might, there might not be a chance for me to go away. That was all right. I wasn't planning on leaving. The digger was a little harder to locate, probably because he wasn't attempting to draw attention to himself. But the government will track you out if they desire you. In an attempt to escape, he had moved to a tiny town and changed everything, including his name and appearance. I nearly felt sorry for the man. He probably wouldn't have agreed to serve as the government's test subject, and now all he wanted was a regular existence. To avoid him getting too close to me, I kept my distance after discovering the town where he was living. After gathering some DNA samples from his trash, I was able to determine that he was, in fact, my target. All that was needed was for me to kill him. Though I had few options, I didn't want to kill him. The extent of his powers and his ability to manage them remained a mystery to the scientists who had created him. Even if I could have revived him, I doubt the government would have had a place to house him. I made the decision I felt was best. One night after he got home, I fired a bullet into the digger's eye socket. Even though I didn't feel good, I kept telling myself it was vital. After I delivered his body, I received payment for my assistance. From here, it wouldn't get any simpler either. Meanwhile, Gambler was my next codename on target. This one was a real beast. I'm not sure what the government hoped to accomplish with Gambler, but it doesn't seem like they succeeded. Gambler is stronger and faster than normal, but he has a small quirk. He eats people. Who knows, perhaps that's just what the authorities desired. As one might expect, Gambler managed to get away. You would think that these government scientists would become more adept at controlling their studies after a certain period, but not. Perhaps this assignment wasn't all that horrible, but I had specific instructions to bring Gambler back to life. My deadly weapons were taken away, and in their place, the tranquilizers potent enough to take down a rhino was given to me. I requested a partner for this job, but was naturally turned down. The Gambler has established himself in the deep woods. This might not have been as bad if there hadn't been a really well-liked hiking track in this woodland. In the forest, disappearances have always occurred regularly, with many of them being believed to be suicides. However, that number had increased dramatically when Gambler made his getaway. I was relieved that the authorities had secured the trail's closure for the weekend, leaving me and the Gambler free from any worries about other people's interference. Though this wasn't exactly how I imagined a hiking date, I've always wanted to go on one. Thus I ventured into the forest, searching for indications of his cave. In preparation, I'd made sure not to take a shower for the entire week. He would eventually get hungry, and it would be much easier for me to pull him back to my car if he came to me. I'd been tracking tracks and marks for nearly an hour, and after that I started to come across bones, human bones to be exact, which indicated that I was coming closer. It took me a few more minutes to walk the path before I started to hear sounds. My date appeared to have arrived. As he got closer, I heard limbs of trees trembling. In seconds, he was poised atop a big tree just before me. He studied me, looking down on me. He may have been 5 or 6 feet tall with a normal build, but appearances may be misleading. Despite appearing considerably younger, his skin was sickly yellow and his hair had started to recede, giving the impression that he was an old man. His eyes had turned completely white, holding nothing but white. He stared down for a moment before jumping. I was mistaken to believe I would have a few seconds to prepare myself for any eventualities because a solid 50 feet separated us. He flew out of the tree and landed right on me like a figure from a video game. There wasn't enough time for me to take out a tranquilizer and jam it into his side. He appeared largely unaffected by the tranquilizer, even despite its potency. He dismissed it with a shrug and chopped off a large piece of my shoulder. He started to feed on the flesh he had chopped off while I lay powerless, and I knew it wouldn't be long before he returned for more. Just as he was about to dive in for another bite, I fought to get another tranquilizer out, and I succeeded. I proceeded to insert the second tranquilizer into his neck forcefully. His jaws locked onto my own neck, but he passed out before he could bite me. I exhaled the deepest breath of relief I had ever felt and shoved him away from me. I put the special restraints I had been handed on him, making sure the extra tight muzzle I had been given fit him perfectly. I hoped the tranquilizers would last long enough for me to deliver this monster, but I wasn't sure how long they would last. I was alive, even though part of my shoulder was missing. I could only speculate as to what horrors science would unleash on me in the future. This was just one creature. I told the supervisors after delivering Gambler that I would need at least a month off, and they obliged. If anything, they were impressed that I had returned largely undamaged, considering what they had put me through. After taking a month-long break from the Gambler's incident, I was assigned a simpler task to help me get back into things. Codename Charming. He was the epitome of an Adonis. Charming in the purest sense of the word. Charming casts a shadow over the most attractive person's statue. He was probably meant to woo foreign diplomats, but from what I've seen, he charms everyone, even himself, which is how he managed to get out of his holding cell. Though I'm sure he could get himself out of that one too. Charming isn't really a threat to anyone save himself should he find himself in the hands of an enraged spouse. It would be difficult to hunt down Charming, but it would be easy to find him. It was as though there was a cult of sorts about him at all times. Charming would always be at an elegant party, never returning to his room without at least 10 people trailing behind him. I would need a well-thought-out plan to get him away from his group. To better understand the situation, I chose to go to one of his parties. It was imperative that I identify any gaps he might have, but I didn't anticipate Charming coming up to me. "Good evening, mister. I do not believe we have met before. I am Charming, and you are—" What was that? I think I came very close to puking in my mouth. Even though he has a big ego, I should have expected this. Seeing that his charm wasn't wearing out on me was encouraging. I'm not sure why, but I believe it might be related to my distaste for his flawless appearance. "Yes, my name is George. I'm kind of new around. It's nice to meet you, Charming." I was able to reply, "Wow, George, what a great name, yet it's not appropriate to be by yourself at a party like this. My friends came with me, but I'm returning to my estate. I'll take you to the more upscale areas of the city." This was going far more smoothly than I had expected. I was getting close to my target. Maybe if I went to his house, I could just wait until everyone else went to sleep and leave with Charming before anyone could notice. "I'm not sure. We just recently met. That's not how I would like to impose myself on you." "Trying to play hard to get," I said. "No, not at all," Charming insisted. "You have to. Vicky, go with my friend George and show him the way to my house. I'll be there in a moment. I have to see someone first." Charming answered with a gesture toward one of the women in his group. Yes, Vicky did lead me to Charming's house. I already knew where he lived though, but I had to act naive. Charming's estate was a veritable palace with exquisite design that gave the impression that a professional architect had created it. Vicky led me inside, and soon her company would follow. They handed me some scotch that looked like it had aged for over a century. Even though I didn't drink much, I accepted it. Charming was late to his own party, arriving over an hour later. As soon as he got here, he came over to me. "George, come with me. I have to show you something," he said to me. Without hesitation, I followed him. I had an opportunity to spend time with him by myself. Before anyone knew better, I could sedate him and be on my way. He showed me to one of the other rooms in the house. I wasn't prepared for the room. It was something else entirely. The walls were adorned with male and female photographs of various individuals. I believe I even identified a couple of them from his team. "What is this?" I asked without even thinking. Charming replied me, "These are folks I have already defeated. Now it's your turn. Kindly take off your clothes." He said this, turning away from me, and started taking off his own clothes. I nearly felt obliged to take off my own clothes. I managed to resist, but his comments had such force. Rather, I went up to him and jammed the tranquilizer deep into his throat. I made sure his lips was duct-taped. For one night, I had had enough of his words. Charming was a lot larger than I was. I had to haul him out of his window and back to my car, which took some work, but I got it done before anyone became suspicious. I guess his pals just assumed he was taking his time, getting to know me. After dropping Charming off, I made sure to take a really good shower that evening. My encounter with Charming nearly caused me to overlook my subsequent task. But I have another exciting project with the codename Kaiju coming up. What is the result of splicing gorilla DNA into human DNA? It seems that you get Kaiju. Regarding Planet of the Apes, I would have chosen the name Caesar, but I guess that's because he's not a gorilla, and I don't get to choose the names. Kaiju is essentially Bigfoot on a smaller scale. Before you ask, I haven't been entrusted with chasing Bigfoot, therefore I can't say if he exists. Kaiju would be a kill task. There's no assurance that the tranquilizer would be effective, or we don't know how long it would last. They were more interested in dissecting what was left of him than worrying about him returning alive, especially since he had killed 2 scientists during his escape. I was given strict instructions to stay away from the head at all costs. I couldn't scatter it all over the floor because they mostly wanted to inspect the brain. My prior familiarity with long-range weaponry presented another challenge for me. Naturally, it had been a component of my schooling, and I had mastered the fundamentals, but that was all. It didn't really matter because I'd been promised that most of my missions would be up close and personal anyhow. Well, it was beginning to look significant now. Like Gambler, Kaiju had moved into a deep forest, but he had picked a much more isolated location because he didn't consume human flesh. I don't believe Kaiju intended any harm to be done to anyone. The authorities would have preferred it if he had spent his entire life in these forests, never bothering anyone. I was told by my superiors that they had already conducted aerial reconnaissance of the region and could pinpoint the precise location of the cave he was staying in. Of course, I would get to perform all the grunt work on the ground since they had already completed the easy portion. I put up the sniper rifle they had given me at a vantage point that overlooked the cave. I just needed to wait now. It took several hours for Kaiju to eventually surface. Stepping out of the cave, he stretched his limbs in the same manner that most of us do when we wake up. I aimed the crosshairs over his heart, steadied the gun, and squeezed the trigger. I missed because I didn't realize that the wind had increased since I had started to wait, and that the bullet had veered to Kaiju's right, striking the cave's rock. However, Kaiju remained motionless, only turning his all-too-human look toward me. He didn't try to run away because he knew I would arrive sooner than that. If I wasn't there, someone else would be. Kaiju had given in to his destiny. Of course, I had already slain the digger, but that was a different case entirely. That's what I'd done while he was sleeping. His final look didn't have to be revealed to me. It was almost as if I had wanted Kaiju to be Gambler, like the monster. I wouldn't have to feel guilty about putting him down that way. I hesitated a little before I unloaded, aimed, and fired again, this time taking the wind into consideration. And boom! Kaiju collapsed in an instant. I went over to make sure he was dead, and fortunately he was. He would no longer have to endure pain. Either way, I knelt, put my palm on his chest, and muttered, "I'm sorry, big guy." It would be impossible for me to pull Kaiju back by myself. Rather, I lit a flare that I had been provided for the occasion and bided my time for the air team to arrive and retrieve him. I started to have serious doubts about my career choice after sitting next to Kaiju's lifeless body. Never before had I felt so ashamed of myself, but I knew there was no saving me. I'm in way too deep already. After going through this, I realized that maybe the government had turned me into another monster. Until then, they'll have to kill me too, but for the time being, I'm still carrying out their dirty work. My next assignment came with the codename Annabella after that episode. To be more specific, Annabella is a ventriloquist doll. She may not look like much, but she's actually pretty dangerous, just maybe not in the way most of you would think. She won't be rushing around your house in the middle of the night stabbing people because she can't move on her own, but she can speak. On the other hand, Annabella possesses a really potent influence. If you look into her eyes, she will be able to dominate you completely. Making human puppets out of a ventriloquist doll is actually a little ironic. You can agree with me. But, in any case, I was informed in my briefings that Annabella embodies the epitome of sadism. She takes pleasure in causing her victims as much suffering as she can before killing them. If devils exist, which I doubt, then that's what's imprisoned in that doll, Annabella. Annabella was taken to one family's house by a scientist who had been enslaved to her, and it was thought that she was staying with a family of 4. Even though she had only been gone for approximately a week, you never know what she might have been up to during that time. A day later, the scientist who had stolen her had gone back to her job and tried to kill her co-workers, but he was apprehended very swiftly. I headed to the family's house in the hopes of getting her, but I was taken aback by what I found. To put it simply, I got my wish, albeit not exactly how I had hoped. After knocking on the front door for a few minutes without getting a response, I turned the handle and discovered that the door was unlocked. I regret having done so. I knew a deathly smell was coming from the house the instant I walked in. Blood was all over the walls, some dried and some fresh and still seeping down. The family were gathered in the living room when I arrived. The mother and her 2 kids sat in a tiny triangle. They were already dead and rotting. Their stomachs had been sliced open, exposing their entrails, and they were arranged so that it appeared as though they were consuming their own intestines. The father, who was suspended from the ceiling in the middle of the triangle, was covered in cuts and scratches, but those were nothing in comparison to what had happened to his family. I heard a voice coming from the other side of the room just as I was ready to dump my food all over the floor. Just in time. How do you feel about my artwork? The voice said. It's a little sloppy, but I'm sure it will improve in time. Annabella, I asked. The voice responded. Oh, I see. Have you already arrived to pick me up? I was enjoying myself immensely as well. Anyhow, I'm done here though. For now, I suppose you may have me back. I'm going to be out shortly, the voice continued. I moved toward the voice, keeping my head down the entire while. I never intended to become part of the mystery of that family. I shut my eyes as I came closer. I lifted her up and turned her over before heading back outside to get into my car. Permit me to take a front row seat. Annabella mockingly remarked, It will be fun for both of us because I like to have conversations during my car rides, and you can get much action from women in this line of work. She asked to be in my direct line of sight, and I obliged her wish even though I really wanted to whack her in the back and cover her with a blanket or something. I carefully positioned her up front, bending her head to face the window. If I said I wasn't curious about her, I would be lying. What distinguishes a monster as a monster piqued my curiosity. Just take me home with you, please. Inform your employer that you didn't see me around. Annabella said, I'm sure we could have a great time together. Yes, you would definitely make excellent kindling for a fire, I responded. You're funny, and I like you. Though maybe I may keep you. I was thinking I'd have someone kill you eventually. So you don't just murder everyone, I asked. Naturally not, she said. Oh, I see, I responded. I like to let the really bad ones live. It's more fun that way, Annabella added. By that, what do you mean? Do you think I'm a horrible person? I was a little miffed about that. I nearly turned to face Annabella, but I changed my mind. She was merely attempting to get me angry. Although you're not quite up to par with me yet, I can already tell you have future like mine, because you didn't even scream when you saw my work. Possibly you even enjoyed seeing it. Though you might believe otherwise, but we are not actually different, Annabella shot back. She was partially correct. Although I didn't react when I saw the massive death at the family's house, I did feel a little unease. However, if it were to be a few months prior, I would have most likely passed out. I'm evolving, whether I like it or not, and I don't think it's for the better. How do you look like? There were a few minutes of stillness before I finally questioned her. I'll tell you when you look into my eyes, she said. Almost laughing out loud, I responded, Nice try. I may be stupid, but I'm not that stupid. What are your fears? Do you by chance think if you look into my eyes you are going to see yourself? She questioned. With anger, I told her, one more word and I'm looking up the location of the closest wood chipper online. I told them about the disarray at the house and dropped off Annabella. They promised to dispatch someone to tidy it up. After that assignment, I was thinking I would get a break because of what I had witnessed, but I wouldn't be so fortunate. They informed me they already had a fresh task prepared for me as soon as I turned in Annabella, and Jungle would be the code name for that task. But I think this was the strangest job I've ever been given. As far as I could tell, the people living in the deep woods were the only humans in the jungle. I was clueless about why I had been assigned the mission of tracking down a human. Maybe he was a scientist on the run, or someone who knew too much, but he was nothing like the creatures I had grown accustomed to pursuing. Things didn't go according to plan this time. However, I was informed that jungle was extremely dangerous and that I shouldn't try to capture him alive because they wanted him dead. This merely piqued my interest in seeing what mysteries the jungle might hold. Although it wasn't easy to locate Jungle because he was always moving, my training paid off and I was ultimately able to locate him in the woods. After observing him for a few days, I didn't think he was hazardous. Sure, he was wary and suspicious, but definitely not dangerous. So one evening, he left his hut to go in search of food. I made the choice to open up. It was time for me to talk to Jungle. When Jungle returned to his hut and saw me seated in a chair, he didn't appear shocked. All he did was extend his arms. They did, in fact, send someone for me, so feel free to take any necessary action. He said, "I won't fight it. Take a seat, Jungle. All I want to do is talk." Jungle arched an eyebrow at this inquisitive individual. "You are aware of the saying regarding curiosity, don't you?" I rolled my eyes and gestured for Jungle to take a seat again. "Jungle, who are you? And why did they send me after you? You don't know? I'm you, at least I used to be." We follow their instructions on who to kill, where to go, and how to bring them back alive. Not a single question would be asked. But I couldn't take it any longer, Jungle said. "So here I am, and here you are." This briefly brought me back. I knew he had to be involved in some way with my agency, but I never realized he had been in my shoes, meaning there wasn't really a way out save for death. I killed Jungle by moving across the room, drawing my gun, and shooting him. I found the answers I was looking for. However, a werewolf attacked me just as I was ready to remove Jungle's body from his tent. I started running for my life, completely forgetting about my training. I didn't want to suffer the same fate that I had done to my targets. I dashed over the forest as quickly as my legs would allow. Eventually, I managed to escape death's grasp. I returned to the house, picked up some belongings, and moved. I couldn't continue working with those terrible people. Even though I am sorry for everything I did, I promised to turn a new life in this new place, where I can get some peace and breath of fresh air, hoping the governments won't find me. Story 3. The Haunt. This might have been one of the scariest experiences of my life, given everything that has happened to me. A few days after Christmas on Thanksgiving, my friend Rick and I decided to go hunting. Rick had agreed to join me because he needed a break from his fiancée, whom he had been fighting with. When he arrived, I had nearly finished getting ready and only needed to pick up the primer for my muzzleloader. He had driven over to my apartment with all of his equipment. We were living in Minnesota then, so we decided to go hunting in one of the worst areas. We talked about our goals for the trip and the hunting conditions as we drove. After a 2-hour trip, we finally made it to the cottage, exhausted but eager for the hunt. We got inside and got comfy immediately, intending to set everything up properly for the next morning. Rick drifted off to sleep quickly, but I couldn't escape the impending doom feeling. I felt like someone or something was watching us through the window. As I stood up to shut it, I noticed 2 big yellow eyes shining in the trees outside, approximately 20 feet up, as I reached for the latch. I tried to make out what it was with strained eyes, but I was unable. I dismissed the uneasy feeling, shut the window, and went back to sleep. After brewing coffee the following morning, I woke Rick from his sleep, and we prepared for the hunt. We set out for Willow River, where we hoped for positive outcomes. We arranged our tools and bided our time. And after a while, we saw some wildlife. Nevertheless, a horrible stink pervaded the air and disturbed our tranquil morning. We tried to ignore it initially, thinking it was a local black bear, but it became nearly intolerable as the smell intensified. Then, the strangest deer we had ever seen dashed out of the trees. Its bones were visible through its skin, and it seemed malnourished. With a snap, one antler broke off, and rot radiated from it. Rick quietly suggested that we end its suffering because it appeared ill. I lifted my gun in agreement, aiming for a clear shot, but just as I was ready to pull the trigger, the deer met our stare and moved closer, maintaining eye contact the entire time. Rick made the snap choice to shoot, aiming for its head. But when the smoke cleared, the deer was nowhere to be seen. All that remained was a bloody puddle. Confusedly, we followed through the blood trail that suddenly ended at the foot of a tree. We looked about and discovered scratches on some trees, but there was no sign of the deer. We decided to pack everything and return to the cabin because we were disappointed. When we got back, it looked like a tornado had ripped through it because of the mess. As we looked toward the tree line, we couldn't get rid of the sense that we were being watched, despite the damage. Outside was a tall, pale figure that looked like the deer we'd seen earlier, but with damaged antlers. Abruptly, a scream that was a mix of animal and human noises shook the whole room and made us shiver. We sprinted to the truck and headed home as quickly as we could. After that terrible incident, I did a lot of study, and the Wendigo mythology was the only thing that could compare to what we had experienced. Though grateful for my life, the feeling of fear persisted long after that tragic event. Story 4. A Journey to the Beast Mountain. Few people know the ghost town near Yellowstone, which is high in the Montana highlands. Long ago, the only route in and out became damaged. It takes an intermediate level of climbing ability to get there. It can only be tried during warm, dry circumstances, which is only a few months out of the year around here. My dad mentioned it once. It was a vague story. The specifics were lost over time, and Dad never liked exaggerating when his memories faltered. As a little boy, he was told a story about a beast living in the forest and a silver mine in the mountains. It was neither a bear nor a wolf. It refused to share the land with the miners in the developing town established to provide for them, even though not actually knowing what they are. As a result, a bloodbath transpired. The survivors left the town and didn't come back. Debbie and I spent a week hiking and camping in Yellowstone National Park last summer. The weather was kind to us. We enjoyed every minute of our off-grid time. We made a vow to repeat the activity by a whispering fireside the previous evening. I told her about the abandoned town while the sky overhead whirled around the North Star, and she took it all in. That would be our destination. Though the prospect of spring makes a hard winter bearable, the summer captured my interest. A week in the mountains, and an extended vacation from school. Being able to accomplish exactly what you want is a unique pleasure. The sun's warmth brought on an unrestrained giddiness. We drove as far as we could, snaking up between mountains, the wait almost over. Debbie stopped the vehicle on the isolated dirt track's shoulder, the misty mountain. With the sun's heat moderated by the air, we lifted our backpacks and began our ascent. To the best of our knowledge, hardly much remains of the abandoned town. The rangers fingered it on a chart despite no one having been there. My father could only speculate about the location. It was an inherited knowledge. He mentioned that it was somewhere up there. When I informed him about our plans, a smile gave way to thoughtfulness, and his narrative inspired our journey. He cautioned me to be careful. I dismissed his concerns. The higher we ascended, the fewer spruce trees there were. As we climbed a stony ridge, Debbie examined the map. We were making good ground, and if fortune continued to favor us, we would arrive by dusk. We had to take a detour that cost us many hours due to an impassable section of vertical rock face. It would have to wait until tomorrow. In the distance, the trees appeared to be gathered against the cool night air, and we could see our destination across the plain from where we were camping. I pondered what we would discover. It seemed likely that not much remained, maybe only a few stumps where a crude wooden house had previously been. We decided it didn't matter as we turned to face the sky and looked for shooting stars. In the dark of night, with the half-moon hanging low over the mountains, Debbie shook me and muttered sentences. She had heard something, and my sleep-deprived mind took its time piecing things together into a comprehensible whole. A sharp, loud cracking sound, like a twig breaking, and a flash of light appeared. I followed the trail of her outstretched hand, dangling in the soft silver brightness of the moon. A yellow light flickered just beyond the horizon, giving the appearance that a candle was burning in a window, but there were no windows and no one around to burn a candle. I was limited to providing hazy solutions. Whatever it was far enough away to be safe. It might have been an optical illusion caused by an air anomaly, or it might have been a hunting party around a campfire, though this was a place for such activities. Neither of us mentioned that it was located on our travel path. We reclined for a while, I periodically opened my right eye to see if the light was still there, and it was. I went to bed after that. We hardly spoke in the morning and started walking toward the abandoned town. I was eager to find a common explanation for the light we had seen the previous evening, such as the bonfire remnants or a lone hermit residing atop the mountain. Debbie thought the same thing, based on how she focused on the trees ahead. We made our way into the dense woodland. The close-growing trees obscured the sun. Stray branches scratched our bare legs. The floor shifted, and I found myself following it down out of instinct, quickly leading to confusion. Debbie pulled out the GPS and the map. The GPS, for some reason, did not work, so she focused on the map. I stepped forward till my boot caught on something firm. I looked down and then leaped back. However, a wooden stake was hammered into the solid earth. It had cracked around 1 foot above the ground, and I could only speculate about what was above. However, more appeared from between the trees. To my left was a clearing full of them, with hundreds of wooden crosses scattered haphazardly. I yelled at Debbie in a weak voice. I took care as I moved through the cemetery to avoid stepping on any crosses directly, based on an old superstition that is pretty challenging to ignore. The crucifixes were made of basic, unadorned wooden boards. While some were destroyed by decay, others had enough preservation left to allow one to read names and dates written across the horizontal member. There were at least 6 people in the group in the back corner, and they all died on December 7th, 1891. I thought about the bloodbath in my father's narrative. Debbie stated, offering her explanation. Probably Chera. We have to be close if anything remains of that place. The terrain climbed, and the spruce thinned beyond the cemetery. As we reached the top of the hill, the remnants of the town were visible, situated on a solid earth platform. Only a handful of the wooden dwellings were still intact. The ground's tint was faded as the lumber split and bent. A couple more had portions of their walls and roofs removed, leaving only a flimsy remnant of what once was. Gazing above, I saw the sloping mountain beyond, and a rusty red mining equipment limb protruding over the rocks. Debbie moved toward the nearest home and opened the door. The door smacked against the dirt within the home as the soft force tore it from its hinge. Nesses from the nearby spruce covered the ground. She went inside, but I stayed outside and looked at 2 cuts in the wood siding. I ran my fingertips down the weather-worn edges, wondering what could have left such markings. "That's awesome," Debbie said. She was correct. Before the relocation back down the mountain, several homes still had outdated bed frames, tables, and chairs. Less than a single glass bottle partially buried in the ground was all we discovered. After dumping our belongings next to the house nearest the cemetery, we climbed the cliff toward the mining machinery beyond. We reached the summit of an unrefined stairway carved out of the rock. Shaft bored into the earth, shortly to be devoured by darkness. An A-frame with a bucket on rails to remove the dirt, and a few abandoned photos comprised what remained of the mining equipment. We were only able to estimate the depth. After climbing a little incline, I sat on a small rock platform overlooking the valley below, with my legs hanging over the edge. From a distance, the mountains appeared to be blue. We stayed there until the western peaks were caressed by the sun. We would camp at the abandoned town tonight and spend a few days there. My red windbreaker, lying on the ground next to a partially fallen house at the back of the abandoned village, was the first indication that something was wrong. The windbreaker was securely tucked into my backpack as we departed. I knew the windbreaker was deep inside my bag, even if it had happened before due to squirrels or birds. To get to it, a squirrel would have to be quite determined. My heart was pounding at the second option. Or could it have been a bear? Our sleeping bags and clothes were everywhere, and our gear was a complete mess. The little gas burner had tipped over. There were 2 top-to-bottom parallel tears in my backpack. I touched them like the 2 grooves in the house's siding. This was basically no squirrel. Debbie rotated the black pan in her hand after picking it up. She displayed an inwardly buckling aspect to me. Debbie tried to reshape it by pulling at the metal with her fingers, but it remained in place. I said it had to be a bear. My hands worked furiously, and my muscles tightened as I searched my backpack for the bear mace canister, hoping to find it where I had placed it. We still had that at least. We searched the ground for bear tracks. The telltale, the broad paws, the fusion of the front and rear legs. I discovered a void in the earth. I hovered above the footprint. My shoe dwarfed in comparison, and there was no second print. Anything that entered our camp had 2 legs, and the feet at the base of those legs were remarkable. It's not possible. Someone is playing a trick on us. Debbie looked at the picture. It was something neither of us had ever seen before. The sun had already set when I turned to face west. The orange color of the sky shifted toward the horizon. Our options were limited, and the light would soon vanish. Whatever it had been, it was no longer present. We were going to set up camp outside beneath the stars, but because there was a scary presence in the forest, we decided to move our sleeping bags and mats inside one of the cottages for minimal security. We risked no fire. Darkness swiftly eclipsed light. As dusk approached, clouds moved in from the west. A mild breeze delivered a slight trace of dampness. The forecast has warned us about possible storms. When I looked out one of the windows, the only thing visible in the sky was a hazy smudge of the moon visible through the clouds. It was completely dark inside the house, and we were nervous. I placed the bare mace canister next to my pillow, palming it now and then to make sure it was still there. We were twitching and turning our ears to the sound of every crack and rustle from the trees. I simply put my head between my knees and contemplated how to go through the remaining hours until dawn. I said I was sorry to Debbie for recommending that we head outside this place. Her voice quivered as she shrugged it off, saying we'd get through it and have an incredible story to tell. I don't know when I went to sleep, but when I woke up, my pillow was wet and it was still dark. A drizzle of rain gently covered the roof. A tiny drop leaked through a hole in the ceiling. I moved my sleeping bag to a dry area on the ground. Thunder rumbled low and menacing in the distance, followed by something closer, a crack from the forest that wasn't a twig, but rather something more solid, and then a deep and low growl. I jolted Debbie out of sleep. We listened in the dark, but nothing came. Had it been a dream of mine? It couldn't have. Should we take a chance and put on the torch since something was out there? No, silence was required. I encircled the naked mace with my hands. The pounding on the roof became more intense, and the trickle from the roof leak became a steady stream. A burst of light illuminated the heavens, followed immediately by a thunderclap that rocked the unstable building we had selected for our shelter. It flew open. The door. I screamed out of control. The door flew back and forth, wrapping around the wall in the increasing wind. I froze in place, my muscles paralyzed by dread. Debbie made an attempt to move forward. I heard a rustle next to me and assumed she was heading for the door. My hypothesis was validated by another lightning strike, showing Debbie's silhouette struggling to find the door in the darkness. In the fleeting illumination, she oriented herself and grasped the door. A second flash followed the first, and a man appeared through the doorway, large and dark. It was not a bear. It appeared motionless in the brief flash of light, but my imagination quickly saw it stumbling toward the open door. I beckoned at Debbie to shut the door. Shortly, Debbie cried, "Help me!" as she clapped shut the door, and a rumbling rumble blended with the thunder. My mental state was abruptly altered by her words, causing me to leap, scramble, and fall into the door. I exclaimed, "Did you see it?" I asked Debbie, as I braced my knees and placed my shoulder against the ancient split timber. "Yes, I did," Debbie replied. "What the heck was that?" I asked further. "Don't know," was Debbie's response. I was overcome with guilt, since I had suggested that we come out here. My goal was to spend another summer in the mountains. Debbie had the option to travel to Mexico with her college pals. For her, duty had driven this journey, at least in part. I pondered over the cemetery, where there were numerous tombs, 6 of them on a single day, and the powerful hand's scratch marks on the house, which confirmed the veracity of the legends. Something lived up here, at least in the crucial aspects, and it didn't like to share its home with people. Debbie's voice interrupted my train of thought. Should we run? No, where should we run to? We had to remain in unison. The creature pushed to the door with such force that I felt like a baby pushing against something. The door crashed back into place as we retreated. The timber pinched my shoulder. Using my hands, I felt the wood and felt a crack. Not much longer would the door hold. The beast snorted and spat through the downpour of rain. Its hot breath blew over my neck and through the breach in the door. After it pushed again, we lost our balance and tumbled to the ground, scattering pieces of the splinter door everywhere. I struck my right side hard. The bare mace canister fell out of my hand and disappeared into the night. Feeling my way through the darkness, I crept after it, ready to be hoisted by my ankles at any second. Debbie shrieked behind me. It had her. When my index finger's edge finally made contact with the canister's cool steel, I muttered it into my palms and rose. It was dark, and I saw nothing. The wind howled as the rain battered down on the roof. The animal growled, and I couldn't find a compass amidst everything. I was about to swing the mace haphazardly when I waited long enough for a jagged fork of lightning to light up the sky. The beast stood in the corner of the room, holding Debbie close to its chest. I took one step forward, sprayed and prayed, as the world darkened again. As the beast let out a cry of agony, Debbie collapsed to the ground near my feet. Outside the house, heavy footfalls sloshed over the sodden dirt before stopping. He had not yet left. I went outside into the downpour, my woolen socks soaked from the wet ground. The rain was chilly and heavy. The warmth left my body washed away by a cold breeze. I shivered, listened, and waited. It might not have fled to the forest after the first dose, but it would with the second. Where had the lightning gone? Was the storm over? A hand caught my arm and yanked me in close as lightning flashed overhead above my face. His thick black hair was saturated from the rain, and his eyes were uncannily similar to mine. Using my free hand, I sprayed the canister up to his flat nose. He hoisted me straight off the ground with his hands in the air. I felt weightless for a few seconds before collapsing again. Footsteps dripped into the distance. It vanished. Until morning, we crouched in the house's back corner. The rain became a drizzle and eventually stopped as the sun rose. We kicked at the broken pieces of the door. A few indistinct footprints, partially ruined by the rain, were pressed into the mud outside. After gathering our belongings, we started walking home. The crosses at the graveyard drove home the point that we had been fortunate to stay alive. I turned and glanced back up the slope before beginning our descent down Rock's shoulder. Meanwhile, a lone light could be seen in the darkness. It glowed, not a welcome light, but a warning on the hill where the cemetery and ghost town were located. What do you think about these stories? Have you had a similar experience before? What was it like? Please share your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you love horror, scary, and creepy stories? The type of stories that would send you shivering to bed? Check out any of these intriguing videos displaying on your screen now,